Welcome to the next in our series of lockdown chats, lockdown interviews. This evening we're talking to Peter Jukes. Peter Jukes is an author, a playwright and a screenwriter, but more recently has done a whole load of investigative journalism on a range of subjects, going back to the phone hacking scandal, the Cambridge Analytica story, and then more recently the exams fiasco. Peter is exec editor of Byline Times. If you haven't come across Byline Times, please do go and check them out. It's just a fantastic resource for independent journalism, commentary, some absolutely cracking stuff on there. So that's bylinetimes.com. Peter's also co-author of the upcoming book, What the Papers Don't Say. Oh yes, and by the way, if anybody has questions for Peter, please put them in the chat. We'll see if we can fit them into the conversation. So welcome, Peter.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. So I just wanted to start off asking you about Byline Times, and I wonder if you could just tell us the story behind it. You know, what the motivation was, and how you got it off the ground, how you structured it.
Oh my God, where do you want to begin? So yes, I was a playwright, and around 2010, partly due to the demise of my mentor and hero, the historian Tony Judd. One of the things he said while he was dying, he died rather terribly from Lou Gehrig's disease, but which is a sort of motor neuron disease and slow incapacitation. But he wrote a book with Tim Snyder, who's a colleague of his, who you may have heard of, been great over recent issues over Trump and Russia. But he said, public intellectuals, why are there no public intellectuals like Camus and Sartre and Aron and people like that? And Tony said, why think investigative journalists are the new public intellectuals? And that really got me thinking that in the age of information overload, in the information age, where 40% of the economy, maybe more now, is predicated on processing information, actually we get less of it, and especially when it comes to the sort of evisceration of journalism, mainly through, oddly enough, Google and Facebook and all these huge mega companies sucking out all the advertising revenues online and not actually producing content. But journalists have been sacked, there's no advertising revenue. You know, people never really paid for the journalists, that with the cover price of the Times pays for the print, the content was paid for by advertising. Anyway, there's a huge structural issue there, and lots of excitement. As a dramatist, I always liked going out sort of, with helicopters, police ambulances, undercover with cops in the Northeast at one point. And I realized that actually I probably should have been a journalist all along.
Right.
And I crowdfunded the hacking trial, phone hacking trial I covered with crowdfunding, advised the site called Byline.com, which is starting up crowdfunding. I crowdfunded a podcast called The Daniel Morgan Murder, Untold, The Daniel Morgan Murder, which is the most investigated murder in British history, tied up with Murdoch and corrupt police. And then did a festival. And then about 2017, 18, my co-director, Stephen Colgrave, said, I will never, because we had a whole, we're always sort of investigating other news organizations, and realized we'd never get sponsored for a festival by any other newspaper, including The Guardian, who we sometimes attacked. And so why not have our own newspaper? And that was the origin of it. Everybody's starting up news sites. There's lots of fake media going around, started up by troll factories, look like news. But something about a newspaper and the masthead is the heroic age of newspapers, like the Daily Planet in Spider-Man and Superman. Where journalists were heroes, they sort of took on the bad guys. And all that trust we'd lost in British media, particularly through phone hacking, but other things, we could maybe, rather than just individual journalists on Byline.com, crowdfunded individual journalists, create a masthead, create a sense of collective values, which we as slightly aging guys could pass on to subsequent generations. And we were very lucky to get a brilliant young editor, Hadi Matharu, who spent a lot of time in local press, edited local newspaper, been in the Independent, to do the kind of newspaper side for us and be our editor. And since then, it's surpassed our expectations.
Right. Okay. Oh, fantastic. So, so to be clear, you don't have any particular, political slants or, agenda in particular.
We have an agenda. We are completely partisan towards the truth.
Excellent.
We have an agenda based on those Enlightenment principles that you can have your own opinions, but you can't have your own facts. That, we, as I said, will be, we will go for where the story takes us and where the evidence goes. Part of that remit, I suppose, is that we dislike liars, we dislike corruption, law breaking, dark money, and dark digital arts. So perhaps we're pretty anti this current government. And Dominic Cummings isn't one of our favorite people. But say had Jeremy Corbyn acceded to power, maybe, Theresa May lost then, or Keir Starmer was in power now, I know we'd be pursuing stories if any signs of corruption, lack of transparency, or law breaking on there.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So yeah, that's our alignment against corruption. Yeah. And I suppose in that way, by the way, another element, sorry to interrupt you, but another element is that what I realized during the phone hacking scandal, that the problem wasn't that he was right-wing, Murdoch. The problem was that he had a monopoly. He had 50% of the revenues of Fleet Street, but only 40% of their circulation. Clear example of price gouging monopoly position. And with Sky at that point, before he handed it over, he had a monopoly of paid-for broadcasting in the UK. And my theory, and this is not right or left wing, is that monopoly leads to market abuse, then ethical abuses. And I very much saw, I went into journalism writing about BBC monopoly and drama, very much saw Murdoch as a monopoly problem. Now, hopefully, there are people, free marketeers, who could agree that, having huge monopolies like Google, Facebook, or Murdoch is dangerous. There are hopefully people on the right who could agree that the rule of law and not breaking electoral expenses is not a partisan issue. Unfortunately, it's ceased to become that under current administration. I think there's a consensus around the rules which we play by, which should not be partisan. And historically, even Thatcher abided by certain rules. And I think that's where our other remit lays, we're anti-monopoly. So that abuse of power, as well as corruption, dark money, is we're not mainstream. We don't want to be mainstream. We want to be outside the system looking in. We don't want to be lobby correspondents. None of us, even Hardeep, I imagine, has given up the idea of a career in mainstream Fleet Street. We want to be on that side, looking in, challenging those sort of cartels and oligopolies. Okay,
excellent. And so this future book that I mentioned, What the Papers Don't Say, this is essentially articles from the Byline Times, or the same sort of subject matter?
Yes, same subject. We have now published, since we first launched in March 2019, about 2,000 articles. But some of them are long reads. A lot of them stay very relevant, especially around Russian interference, dark money, dark data, Black Lives Matter, history, empire, and Brexit. So we're going to combine the best of those essays and create a book. So it will be the long reads, as it were, and the stuff that doesn't date from our first 2 years of Byline Times.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so I wanted to ask you about one of the big stories that you've talked about a lot on Byline, which is really about the sort of methodology and technology behind the Trump election and Brexit, which is this kind of mass use of misinformation, propaganda, psychological profiling, this kind of new way of trying to influence elections, essentially, and undermine democracies. So, I mean, this is like someone's invented a new weapon, and
literally,
yeah, literally, and we need to understand the capabilities of this thing, not least because we need countermeasures. So, I just wanted to ask you a bit about that. So, first of all, are you surprised at how well this works? Given that, I mean, there are two big cases: the US and the UK. Open societies, free access to information. Does it surprise you how well this stuff works?
Yeah, I mean, just on the weapons issue, Steve Bannon, people always forget this. He was co-founder of Cambridge Analytica, met Chris Wiley,
Yeah.
and is big funder of Robert Mercer. So Bannon's talked about as Trump's campaign manager. He found this company which is so scandalous it's been shuttered, apart from what his right-wing connections. He called the combination of Breitbart had Cambridge Analytica had exclusive access to Breitbart's tagging and their targeting, his weapons. So there you go. There's a reference. He doesn't see this as an instrument of enlightenment or of curiosity or inquiry, but as warfare. He, oddly enough, made his previous job had been working World of Warcraft, selling the gold on a game. He gamified politics. The other thing to remember is, I helped Chris Wiley come forward, and he told me, must have been maybe November, maybe before the story came out, that it's, what Cambridge Analytica used was a military-graded weapon from SCL, which had an export license, was categorized that it was military-grade software. And how he explained it and what he did in those early days as head of research was target the fifth battle space. Until then, you basically had psyops, which was putting leaflets out, making people vote one way or fear American, whatever it was, and cyber. And basically the thinking around 2013-14 when he got involved in Cambridge Analytica was the fifth battle space. So the four obvious battle spaces are land, sea, air, and outer space, right? i.e. satellites. The fifth battle space is the information space. And he used a graphic example, I think, or maybe, I think he did to me right back then, that information operations, the fifth battle space, was strategic in places like Iraq, whereas if you wanted to kill a head of the Republican Guard and you couldn't get at him, he was in a bunker, you'd surround him by information, false information, images coming from a hill nearby that there was a stranded American squad, signals, information, imagery, and he would go up on that hill and be sniped or killed by a drone. And so that's what information operate. They move your enemy, as it were, into a different space where space you want them. You move the information around them. And he said that was very much their thinking when they were targeting potential Trump voters in 2015. And that was the technology to move the public. So you have a military-grade weapon used domestically on the British public and the American public to move their minds so that people would think that Hillary, fake news, that Hillary was, very ill or part of a paedophile network, or even more importantly, they do this thing. They did it first with Ken Cuccinelli, a very right-wing candidate for governor of West Virginia. And he was so right-wing, he was thought you should ban oral sex in marriage, which is an extraordinary thing to police, an extraordinary proposition. Anyway, they realized they could move independent voters to his side by targeting them on the free speech issue. Basically, they psychometrically profiled the kinds of people who believed in free speech. That's the openness they had high on the openness and conscientiousness score of the Ocean score. There's 5 categories: O and C are openness and conscientiousness. And they targeted ads to them saying, and it was brilliant, it worked brilliantly with this group. Ken Cuccinelli says what he thinks, and so do you. So they marketed this right-wing candidate to them as somebody like them who just likes this free speech. You saw that consistently in Brexit, over animal rights, over immigration. So Believe would go, it's racist, the EU won't let your Commonwealth friends in, but then, EU's terrible with animals. So they psychometrically profiled, as we know, they hacked 75 million Facebook users' databases, including my own, all their likes, profiled somebody very, very well after 100 likes or so, and targeted disinformation to them based on their psychological profile. That was the military weapon. And how effective does it need to be? All it needed to be was persuade one voter in 50 to change their mind, and Brexit was lost or won. It's a very small margin to win that vote. And that coupled with the declared spending. Vote Leave already been fined for £675,000 they illicitly spent to Believe, a subgroup, which wasn't a subgroup. But we can see always in the last elections, all these weird Facebook campaign groups that only go up to £20,000, all these weird outfits and commercial. And the Sun registered as a campaigner, and the Daily Telegraph sold its data to the Conservatives in 2015. But elections cannot be managed in this new sphere where dark money and dark ads are actually lending their weight to a candidate and to a party we don't understand.
Yeah, sure.
So
yeah, definitely, massively. Thank you. So, I mean, just in terms of how well we understand this technology and how seriously we're taking it as a society, and how far we are in understanding how you might counter this, where do you think we are? Because it feels like we're at the very beginning of a journey here in working out how do we respond to this new threat.
Well, there have been some movements. It's amazing. No, the Cambridge Analytica scandal, Vote Leave scandal, that was down to Carol. I had a minor part to play and had an amazing impact. Facebook was called before Congress. It was fined £2 billion, or was it £5 billion? Derisively fines here because of our legislation. But then the DCMS committee recommended stringent new rules on data sharing, and some of those have been enacted, but still to be stronger penalties for electoral overspends. More importantly, I think it's the process of education. Facebook is beginning to flag up some of the disinformation. Thanks to the recent parliamentary report, many more people are understanding how Russia got involved, how Putin got involved in 2016 and since, which 4 years ago, there was few of us crying in the wilderness. Once people understand that, once they understand they're being swarmed by bots, these aren't real people, these are robots or shills or trolls, we become immune. There's a kind of natural immunity begins to arise. And I think the self-patrolling mechanism you're seeing on Twitter, which has shut down some of these sort of abusive and networked accounts, that is the ultimate. I mean, it's like coronavirus. Ultimately, government's been crap. I think the British public have been much better than the government, despite the lack of guidance. They've socially distanced. And I think when it comes to the infection of fake news and disinformation, we're going to have to educate ourselves. One of the principles of Byline Media and then was that, we all become citizen journalists at some point in our lives. The idea of journalism comes to the idea of a journal, a diary, and that, people witness things and they wrote it up. But we all have to definitely become citizen editors. We all have to check the veracity of the sources. And social media, ultimately, and I've seen this evolved, I've been working on major blogging sites since 2004, is that initially it starts up in optimism. Then, that's happened in Twitter 2013 or Facebook, it all gets gamed. And then people despair, and then they start self-monitoring. You get community moderation, and the people rise up, as it were, and start negating this fake news. But you still get the coronavirus. It needs a lot of work.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's kind of more hopeful, I think, than possibly what I was expecting. Because
the problem is despair.
Yeah.
It's the worst time I've seen this country in my lifetime. Mind you, it's a brilliant time for journalism. All that's wrong in British Constitution, state, and Whitehall and Westminster was already wrong. And those norms which people like Cummings and Johnson walked through, of breaking the norms of British politics, were only norms, and they need to be firmed up. So there's always optimism in these moments of darkness, in that finally you see what's wrong. The fact that Johnson and Gover and Cummings are in power, in a way, is a good thing. They can stop blaming other people. They can own this Brexit debacle and all the other debacles, from NHS tracing apps to, circuit contracts to A-level results and that algorithm. Things have to get darker before they're better. And they were always there to be exploited. So it's probably better to know now there was this loophole, there were these gaps which they could drive their cart and horses through. So I'm I'm not positive. I think Britain's gone back 20 years, 30, 3 decades. It's lost complete prestige in the world, but it was punching above its weight. It was hinged on all these public school assumptions and all these norms of behavior, which all it took was somebody ruthless to just completely break. Now we can repair, I think.
Yeah, okay. I mean, so on the misinformation side, I guess the norms are, we used to have this deference towards authority figures, doctors, scientists, blah, 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 and just take all that stuff on trust. And now that's gone out of the window. Now it's this complete free-for-all of opinion. But I guess what you're saying is hopefully at some point that will evolve into some ability to actually think critically and appraise things in some kind of rational way.
I think so. I mean, the problem is that British journalists had already devolved into opinion. The Telegraph in 1980 was a source of fact, it was a paper of record and right-wing opinion, but it's separated the two. By the time, I suppose, maybe revenues are declining, by the time Dacre takes over the Mail and Murdoch and the Sun and the News of the World are rising, it pretty much is weaponized information anyway, whether it's against gays or black people, if you read News of the World, or Liverpool supporters or Hillsborough. The British press has been the feral press for years, and anything that stopped it, that sort of compensated it, was the BBC, which is now supine and very weak. But it had already gone that way. And I think most people just were oblivious to it. The phone hacking trial came along, they disgusted by mainstream journalism. And in that absence, you're right, all these fake news sites could come up. But to be honest, some of the existing news sites were pretty fake anyway. People complain about the Canary, not that that's fake, but very opinionated, or Navarra Media. I go, yeah, it is. I mean, I prefer fact, let people make up their own minds. Don't tell us what to think, show us what's happening, none of this outrage. But, the Daily Mail, the Express, the Sun have lived on outrage for 30 years. I can hardly blame Navarra Media and the Canary for going that route. And the deficits, the hunger for information, the desire of teenagers to become journalists. I mean, I avoided a journalistic career when I was in my 20s because it just looked boring, and I came back at it late in life. Everybody I speak to who's younger, who sees what's happening, believes and looks at somebody like Carol Cadwallader, goes, it's a heroic pursuit, it's public interest. And for all the denigration of mainstream media, I think journalists are even more heroes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I think, do we have a question from Dee? Do you have?
Yes, I have a couple actually. One is a kind of a very simple question about the Byline Times, and it's from a lady who's a WASPy lady. Are you aware of all the WASPy stuff, Peter?
No, David Henke writes regularly for us on this.
Yeah, yes, I've seen him. And basically, because she's on a very, very small income, this is Alison, she sent this question in, and she wondered if subscriptions could be quarterly or even monthly to help her pay, because her income is really that stretched that it's a big lot in one go. So
my great sympathies with her, and I'm really sorry to hear that. You can buy individual copies. I think they're like £2 a month. Is £2.50. The problem is organising the print one. So if you segment it into quarterlies, you don't know what the print one size is going to be. It's quite complicated. It's basically done annually, so we can so we don't overprint. But I would add to that, all the articles are free online.
Right. Okay.
So what you get with the paper is the best 25%, specially curated, edited down, redesigned, created in a narrative. And part of the reason why people will pay to have an extra amount to have their name on the front, it's kind of members or supporters on the back, is they understand that the only way we can pay for all the journalism happens is through subscription to the newspaper. But if you pay for that, we do provide it online for free. So we're never going to have a paywall. It's kind of the people who can afford it subsidize the people who can't afford it. So hopefully that she can get access to all the articles online. And if there's an edition she wants, I mean, I'd love to say, we'll just send it to her.
Yeah.
The people who pay might get a little bit annoyed because we can't really means test everything. But
maybe you should have a charity pot for people who can afford to pay a bit more to put a bit extra in or something. I don't know.
Yes, but then exactly. That's why the charity pot is there, and that's why they get everything free on.
Oh, right. Okay.
There's we used to have exclusive content in the paper only, but we don't do that anymore. So anything you see in the paper has already been online.
Okay. And the other thing is about because you've got these regional editions. So how does that work? And would there be any sort of mileage in looking into a Scottish edition, for example?
Absolutely. So just to explain, we have set up the Bylines network. It's an affiliation. We don't own the companies. They're citizen journalists. I don't think they don't charge anything for their services either, though they do encourage maybe crowdfunding. And we've done that by, if they ascribe to our kind of basic values of evidence and good principles of, in a way, that's not diversity, it's proper representation of this country, which means you get opinion from a wide range of people, not just, a couple of vox-pops on the streets and some rich Etonian, expostulating in the pages of the Telegraph. And then we help provide the software for publishing, and our designers have provided the template free, and we support each other editorially and in terms of promotion. So, yeah, I mean, any of them I can give. They want to email me, peter@byline.com or info@bylinetimes.com. I can put them in touch with web developers and then with the team who help building these Bylines networks. I think there's 6 now. And it's amazing to gain the proof to what, we were talking about earlier, that there is a hunger for journalism, especially regional. Local papers are closing, regional papers are closing. People want genuine voices, and we're just trying to facilitate that network.
Okay, right. I'll hand you back to Paul. Thank you.
Thanks, Dee. So actually just thinking about the kind of the Scottish, coverage of Scottish politics, I was thinking about just how striking the difference is between Scottish government response to recent events, like coronavirus or the exams fiasco. It does feel as though Scottish politics and English politics seem to be going in completely opposite directions, and it kind of I find it puzzling that we have essentially a populist Prime Minister in Westminster, but we have a First Minister in Scotland who's becoming more popular by being an anti-populist, by being completely realist. And I'm just curious as to why you think that is. What's the cause of this big difference? And we see it in other areas. We see it in Scottish nationalism as a very different beast to English nationalism, at least as it is at the moment. Why do you think that is? We
actually, and you have other models like Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, that this rationalist, evidence-based approach not only gets results in terms of the coronavirus, but inspires confidence. Before lockdown, we were prepared. We were just going to Scotland to film our second film. Our first film on the rise of English nationalism had been viewed from over the Irish Sea in Belfast and Dublin. We spoke to the former leader of the DUP, the Unionist Party, saying he feared English nationalism much more than Irish nationalism, and that he found more in common with Dublin than London those days. And there's an amazing film we did with Sheridan Firm about how English nationalism appeared. We spoke to the head of the Lions Party, Sinn Féin, the great writer Frank McGuinness, about this rise of English nationalism, which had been hidden under Britishness. And our next plan was to go to Scotland, had it all booked up, to discuss how Scottish nationalism had created civic nationalism, very unlike the English nationalism we're seeing hidden under Brexit. But lockdown came, and so we have to probably pick that up again. And so we feel we missed slightly on this coverage. But we have covered the support for Sturgeon. And one of the ways it's been put to me on Byline Times, it's not that Scotland has left England. England left Scotland like 20 years ago and shifted ever further to the right, ever further to a sort of deregulated, offshore-based, I hate the word neoliberal, but let's use it now, neoliberal economy of privatization and individualism. And I think even the last election, Boris Johnson appealed to the Red Wall, the Northeast and the North, on the basis of back to solidarity. I mean, immigration is partly the cover. You're English, we'll look after you. it's a nasty form of solidarity to out-group identification, get in-group identification, but promise this leveling up. And it's not happened, hasn't happened since austerity. It's been the disparities, which already wide by 2008, have been aggravated by the financial crash. I think Scotland has that tradition of social democracy, and which was a British tradition, and Scotland's brought it to the Labour. Keir Hardie brought it to the Labour Party, if you like. And I think there's regionally a demand. I think that in London there's a demand for that. But we have the problem of the, if you like, partly the xenophobia or the left behind England. The Brexit vote was an English vote. Anthony Barnett, who I saw the weekend, compares, I think, Wigan with, is it Ravenscraig? No, it was another Scottish town. It's just south. Anyway, only 150 identical demographics, former steelmaking town. Wigan was an industrial town. It's exactly the same, so decline over the last 50 years. And they voted 70-30 in Scotland to remain and 70-30 in Wigan to leave, or figures like that, might be 65-35. Everything else was the same in these two towns. It was the identification in English minds that EU was the problem, and in Scottish mind, the EU was the solution to. And this is, that's how English now, but it's an unviable premise, because none of the design minds of English nationalism, better working, more esteem, better working conditions, high streets filled, better social care will be answered by what is being promised. So you have this ever-ending spiral of a hubris, which only get met with more disappointments and needs more treachery, needs more people to blame. Chris Gray read a fantastic piece last week at the Byline Times about how it just, Brexit always needs to be portrayed, because, and so that it's a kind of pseudo-populism, as they call it. That is a spiral that could get very nasty, but it doesn't lead anywhere to any kind of material satisfaction. And, is a hiding to nothing. At some point, the promoters of this will realize this. So historically, it's a dead end. My personal belief is that everything that's wrong was already wrong. British Constitution was weak, easy to exploit. We need a federated system. I'm scared of English nationalism, so I was, as an Welsh, Armenian Englishman, Londoner, against Scotland leaving, but I completely understood why my Scottish friend voted for India Ref in 2015. Now I think that's untenable, the current situation, and we need a federated system. But that means so many other changes, like the Royal Family, House of Lords. It's going to be tumultuous, but this is, I believe, the tottering of the internal empire. Final word on this, as Anthony Barnett always points out. Why does Britain always hate the EU, the UK? Why? Because it itself is a multinational, multi-denominational state. Most other countries in Europe, they were never nation states. They were always empires, and they stopped being empires, parts of other people's empires, if it's Poland or Hungary or the Czech Republic. But after the EU was formed, they went from having an empire overseas or being part of a European empire to part of this bigger thing called the EU, which kind of antidoted that need for empire. And because we haven't really faced our own decline properly, we still got the security table seat, we still to cozy up to America rather inefficiently on invasions like Iraq. We haven't gone through that mental decolonization in our own minds. And that's happening now.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. So that's like saying that a bit of decline is actually a good thing because it's a dose of reality.
Unfortunately, the tragic hero, my drama background, the tragic hero has to be confronted with his failures, with his hamartia, with his flaws. As a child, you tell kids, don't put your hand in the fire, it's hot. They put their hand in, ouch, it's hot. Yeah, then they learn. I've got a lot of hope for this. Going back to your thing about optimism, is that, I do think both Brexit and Trump are the last hurrahs for a kind of white supremacism, because they're both those blonde bombshells, Trump and Johnson, appeal to some idea of kind of manhood or elitism. I think it applies to both Trump and Johnson. That Trump and Johnson are a stupid man's idea of a smart man and a poor man's idea of a rich man. Now, the demographics are, and so that's unsustainable because they're not, they want to be oligarchs. They're not actually effective oligarchs. They're not effective statesmen. That itself explodes. But the demographics are that in America, when Nixon played the Southern strategy, going for the white Democratic vote, tipping their racism in '68, or Willie Horton with against Dukakis ad, Bush first ad against Dukakis, I suppose, the black and Hispanic American population was suddenly at like 11%. It's now heading towards 30%. Likewise here, my kid brother, Dr. Kid Brother, was half Bayesian. That if you like, the black, Asian, and minority ethnic community here is getting bigger all the time. So it's going to be 20%. I think it's like 13, 15%, 20% now. It's kind of a last hurrah to appeal to that imperial white man's burden. And for the racism that's evoked, if you like, as part of Brexit. Not all Brexiteers are racist, as we always say, but most racists were Brexiteers. That will make less sense to their grandchildren. At school, mixed with people from all different kinds of ethnicities and backgrounds. And 2016 was, I think, their last chance. You've got people like Douglas. You've got all these kind of, weird ex-imperial powerlights, Hannon, Murray. They're all looking back to an empire too. It's not going to happen. India's not going to let us take it over again. Japan's not going to give us a good trade deal. We get a deal with Liechtenstein, which is the same population of God knows whatever. They're laughing at it. The whole world is laughing at it. So anyone who isn't laughing at us is Trump and Putin. They're laughing behind our backs. I just don't think that's sustainable. And looking at kids, looking at the A-level thing, looking at Black Lives Matter, I actually have enormous hope for the future.
Okay, that's great. No, that's really encouraging, I must say. My last question was essentially going to be that, which is, peering into the future, for the rest of Johnson's term or beyond, really. How do you think the rest of his term is going to pan out? What are your main hopes and fears? Well, hopes last, right? We want to finish on a hope, but what are your main hopes and fears for the rest of his term?
Yeah, I am a natural optimist of the pessimism of the intellect. Was it? I can't remember. It was Walter Benjamin or that guy who was in prison, so the Italian guy. Anyway, whoever said that. Oddly enough, there are moments. It happened. My kid brother, one I mentioned, died quite young, sadly, 4 years ago. I got this weird thing. I was quite optimistic of the intellect, but I couldn't move. I had pessimism of the will. At the moment, it's very tiring doing Byline Times, but there's a feeling of a great crusade and working with other journalists like Carol for open democracy. But I feel quite a lot of optimism of the will ever since 2016. I think I've been semi-traumatized and slept at nights. I think a lot of people have. We felt that something happened we didn't understand. I think I do understand what happened. And it was Trump, Russia, Brexit. The combination of that dark money, it's the only experience. I had the same feeling of Brexit. That's weird, but at least Trump won't get in. And he got in. Oh my God, what is going on? And then we have the Russian stuff for Trump. And then you look at, oh my God, Mercer, Trump, Brexit, Cambridge Analytica, all began to get laid out. They can't do that again, but they are devious. I think that Cummings is definitely, I know this, amalgamated all the possible data he can from government, which has a vast amount of data, getting all the central government gateway to create another election machine, perhaps, if you shouldn't hand over the data, but you can trust him given his past record, to create a sort of atomistic society driven by these techno-libertarians who have a dim grasp of genetics, who think run algorithms on A levels based on past performance. Of that school, where did meritocracy go? Where did the individual go on that? And meanwhile, they're cashing in the fast startup golden times Klondike of healthcare data. that is the kind of, yes, the gold rush now. All these contracts going to these cronies for PPE. There's a lot of paying off, the hedge funds, the rich oligarchs. We move from neoliberalism to oligarchy on the verge of that. Mm-hmm. So my fear is we are heading towards a state like Putin's Russia. We're heading to manage democracy. But beyond trolling me on Facebook or the legal threats I get through strange lawyers, or the kind of, I've had lots of threats from tabloid journalists, even worse than being hacked by them, but the sense they will knuckle down on journalists. But then, are they going to imprison us? People ask me from Daniel Morgan murder, am I scared? Not really. What, how's it going to get away with? We'll have that shut down the story by getting me. I don't think either the rule of law, the courts that still exist, would wear it. I don't think the British people would wear it. It's just not extreme enough for them to come out. But I do think there's a lion there that could be roused. They're not parading the streets about algorithms, then maybe the kids are. They came out in great numbers of Black Lives Matter. I think the anger is building, and when I get those dark nights and think they're going to get away with it, and they're going to go for me, go for my house, go for my money, go for my reputation, they tried some of that. I am more convinced to do more, because these go down with all guns blazing, and fucking, pardon my language. But the growing support for things like Byline Times, on the Russian report, it's on a knife edge, but I don't think they're comp enough to pull this off. The damage they inflict in the meantime has been vast and will be vast. Yeah. But as we've learned during the coronavirus, economic impacts are not everything. I said on an interview with Joe Politics, which was a bit wild, what would you prefer? 25% off your salary or lose a parent? And 25% off the salary would take us back to the salary rates in 2000, but your parent, that the economic costs of Brexit can be recouped. And the moral, philosophical, the legal stuff always required us to fight for it. And we hadn't seen what's going on. So like in any battle, it's like Arjuna and Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna is talking to this warrior. Arjuna is going to go and fight his brothers. And he says, look, this battle always had to happen. Don't fare well, fare forward. And people like you, and I know there's a lot of great people coming on to this. We are many, they are few.
Absolutely. And we are real. We're not bots. We are human beings.
I can see that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that was really interesting. And I think people watching will have found that really interesting as well. So I just want to thank you again for your time. That was absolutely fascinating.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for listening to me. I know I speak in very long paragraphs, but these complicated issues. And meanwhile, good luck with your project, and hope to see you again soon.
Excellent. Cheers. Thanks.